So, how many of you know this story? Just out of curiosity, because it's being a storyteller, I love to know how many grew up with these different stories. But how many of you have heard of a story called Stone Soup? Oh, okay. Most of you know this story of Stone Soup. The basic gist of the story is sometimes it's one fellow, sometimes it's two fellows. And in the version that I like, it's two guys walking into a village, and they're hungry. They've been traveling for a long time, and in some stories, it's that they've finished fighting in an army, and they're just now, the war is over, and now they're just wandering from village to village looking for work. But in a lot of these stories, it's just two people wander into a village. And they walk up to these houses in this village and are looking for food. And so they begin knocking on the doors, looking for something to eat. And one by one, the folks don't have anything. They say, we don't have anything at all. And I was reminded the other day as I was kind of rethinking and reading over what I thought about this sermon. And then I remembered we do something with our neighborhoods now. I don't know if you have the neighborhood app that's called Nextdoor. Do some of y'all have that app? Nextdoor neighborhood app. And it's really helpful. It's interesting, but it's also kind of feeds into a lot of what goes on in our culture, a lot of this anxiety and a lot of this fear and such. And I thought about if it were today, what would be happening. This is what would happen. They'd come to the door and somebody would come to the door and knock on the door, and then all of a sudden everybody on the app would look down and they'd see this thing that came up and it would say, someone's knocking at my door. Because they do that. They do that. And then text will come back and say, well, who was it? Or who is it? And they'll say, well, I'm not opening it up, but it doesn't look like somebody I know. I don't know what they want. And then somebody will come back on the app and, well, maybe you better ask them. They look suspicious. And this kind of stuff happens, right? Or they'll say, somebody was walking down the sidewalk. I haven't ever seen them before, just letting you know. There's this anxiety. And it's this anxiety we live with now. I told you before last week, this anxiety is so pronounced in our culture. And I blame media, but I also blame ourselves. I also blame us for just letting things get to us that way. And it's natural. It's where our brains are. We've got these primitive lizard brains in our back of our minds that are still oriented around fear and flight, and you're not my people, and they're my people, and I can't trust you. And so I understand that. I get this. But it's still I get to thinking about this app and how these things go around. And I told you last week, we're going to Germany. Some of the family are going to Germany to see my kids over in Germany. And we'll be over there during the Christmas holiday season and stuff. And the Christmas markets will be up. And I remember telling somebody from Germany that I was going to go see this. And then some of these folks that I've told this, it's not just that, it's been a lot of people that have told me this. I said, I'm going to go see Christmas markets. And their first response is, don't get run over. Right? It's like saying, I'm going to go to Las Vegas. Don't get shot. And but these anxieties, we live with these fears. They're a part of our makeup. They become how we define our reality. It was bad enough when I would look at Jay and I'd say, this is Jay, and I know exactly what Jay is. In reality, I only know a little bit of Jay, and I only know part of his stories, but I already defined him. I've already known. It's enough that we label one another. It's enough that we objectify one another. We've got all of this problem right now going on with the harassment of women by men, and this objectification. I mean, if we got to that place where Martin Buber, the theologian, would say, where we came to where we could see one another as sacred, where we recognize that this moment right here, God is right here. My greeting, my opening to you and your opening to me is the beginning of experiencing some of the depth of God's presence in the world. If we could get to there and start seeing people as I, thou, instead of you're just another object to me, it's just a part of our problem. It's a part of our difficulty as a culture. So anyway, that's a long story. So they're knocking on the door, and they're finding that there's no food. Right? So the guys get frustrated and they start to wander out of the town when the one guy looks at the other guy and says, I have an idea. Just follow with me. And they go over to the blacksmith and they get a big cast iron pot. They go get a bucket and they fill it up with some water at the pump. Then they build a small fire. You know the story. They get the fire going. They get the pot boiling. And meanwhile, this guy, he's found a really smooth little rock and he's put it in his little jacket pocket. And when people see this water boiling and the steam coming up, well, now they're really curious because now these strange people, they're on their apps and they're going like, well, they're boiling water in the middle of the street now. What do I do? And so they start to poke their head out, and they look, and they see this thing, and then one or two of them come up, and they go, what have you got going on here? And the guy says, well, this is stone soup, and he puts out this really smooth spoon, and he throws it in there. And he says, well, what did you do that for? And he says, oh, this is amazing. This is amazing. You've never had this? And then his buddy's playing along with him, going like, this stuff is awesome. This is great. We just lucked out at finding this rock over here. It's the perfect rock. And they said, well, what does it taste like? And they said, we got to wait till it's finished, but it's really great, but it's always good if it has a little bit of flavor, a little bit of extra stuff to add to it. They're like, what? And they said, well, I don't know. We're not going to find anything around here but carrots, for example. Well, one of the neighbors says, well, I guess I've got some carrots. And so they run off and they grab carrots, and then they throw them in. And then another person comes out because they see one of their friends out there. And well, they haven't eaten them yet, so I suppose it's safe. I can go out there. So they go out there, and the same thing. It could be nice if we got the carrots, maybe we get some potatoes. And you know how the story goes. Little by little by little, they end up, everybody brings something that they've got, and they throw it in the pot, and you end up with this wonderful stone soup, right? And they all share in the community, all participate in the meal, and it's a wonderful, positive experience. And as the guy's leaving, this friend looks at him and says, you really pulled the wool over their eyes. I mean, that worked. We got food and everything. And he said, no. He said, that's not the point. He said, they didn't realize they have all the ingredients to create this soup. I just had to remind them. That's what's going on in this story. The Tower of Babel. We see it as something else. We've always seen it as something else. If you know the story, I always knew the story as something else. I always knew the story as God's judgment. Here they are trying to build a tower to God. Look at that. I need to stop them. Need to stop them before they figure out that they're going to be able to be as powerful as me. I got to stop them. And so we see that scattering as punishment. I remember a picture book that I had that was Bible stories, and it had the Tower of Babel in there as one of the picture stories, and it had this great image of God's hand coming in and flicking them off of the tower. I thought, this is so awesome. I mean, and so bad. It's like, it's classic. We are teaching kids terror from the very beginning, right? Just flick them off there. So, but it was not about that. I was reading one of my favorite theologians and Old Testament professors or scholars, Walter Brueggemann, still around, still a great writer. And he has this thing that he talks about this story, and a lot of these stories we've always seen as retribution, as God's retributive justice. And our culture sort of bathes in retribution, right? Eye for an eye, violence for violence, protection. We get into these defensive stances. And we have this retributive orientation to life. He says that's not what this story is about. That's the problem. People see this story as being one of retributive justice. He said it's about distributive justice. He says it's about the fact that they've built this reality and surrounded themselves so they don't have to be in the world. And that misses the entire point of why you're here. In the very next story, after you go through a bunch of begats, in the very next story, God approaches Abram and says, I want you to be the leader of my people, and your family, your people will be blessed, and you will be blessed to be a blessing. You'll be blessed not so you can go off and build a city. I just flicked those people off the tower. That's not what that's about. You'll be blessed to be a blessing. It's about distributive justice. So I was wrestling with what this text means because, as you know me, I tend to like to see something a little bit different, a little scant about the Bible. I think the Bible stories are profound. I think somebody said to me the other day, we were talking about, well, is this a literal story? Did it really happen? And I'm like, does it matter if it happened? Is it important to you that it happened? And they said, well, yeah. And I said, well, okay, then it happened. It didn't. For me, it didn't, because it doesn't matter. Because if you tell me your story, when I truly listen to your story, I'm changed. If I truly listen to that story. When I tell you my story, if you truly allow me to tell my story, I'm changed. Stories are profound truths. The biblical stories are profound truths, not because they're historical or scientific, it's because they're story. And they're stories that have been generated and regenerated and retold and rethought through and refigured out and restruggled with over thousands of years. They're powerful, the same way the stone soup just moves you one way or the other. It's just a story. No, it's a story. So I've been wrestling with this thing, and I couldn't go to sleep. Now, I tack this up to being 60, maybe, because I wasn't feeling particularly anxious, but I did one of those deals where, I got myself rested up. I did all this stuff to get prepared for sleep. I laid my head down. It was about 11:30 at night, and I could not sleep. And my sons were like, well, Dad, when you get in that dark place and you start thinking about death, and and I'm looking at my son going like, Tim, do we need to talk? Maybe we need to talk about this, And he's saying, was it that? And I said, no, it wasn't that. No. I said, I just could not sleep, and that just got me more frustrated because I know how important my sleep is. And then I fell asleep for about an hour, and I had this dream. And it troubled me. I couldn't figure out what this dream was about. And I don't typically want to share dreams because I think that's a little weird, and that kind of gives you a little bit of my unconscious, and now you can kind of go play with that if you want to. But I dreamt that I was with few people in here. Sharon was in there. There's several others that are in here. You're part of my peeps, so to speak. And so, you were there. And I was going to go to a play. We were going to go see a play, which was kind of interesting because I'd recently seen a play. And as I mentioned, Jakey was in a play this past couple of weekends, and some of y'all saw that. And so all this is just filtering through the brain, right? That's how it works. And so, but we're supposed to be there on time. And we're running late because I usually am running late. And usually Linda's reminding me that I'm running late, and so we don't want to miss the opening of the play. And so we've got all these folks that are friends that are in different parts of this play. And as I get to the theater, I'm expecting to see them there. And the lobby's empty. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we're late. I hate being late now because now it exposes me. Well, it just turned out that's what was happening because as I got to the curtain to go in, I didn't have my pants on, right? So that's the exposure, right? That's the whole exposure thing going on. But I kind of have lucid dreaming, so I sort of correct dreams. I self-correct them. So I looked off to my left. There's my pants. Okay, right there. So I put on the pants, and I start to walk into the theater, right? Now, this was the weird thing. It's this beautiful, beautiful theater. It's like the Bass Hall. It's just gorgeous. But all these seats, there's this one section of seats that are right to the right of the curtain. And they're in this little pie-shaped V with like 2 seats at the front and then 3 seats and then more seats. Well, obviously, I'm also thinking about in here. I'm also thinking about this place. But as I look down, that's where a lot of the people I know are. And then a lot of people I don't know. And there's Linda. She's crawled over some people, literally, to get to the one seat that's available, right, in this little grouping. And then there's one more behind her, and she's going, come on, hurry up. They're starting. Get in the place. And I'm stopping, and I'm looking around. I kind of sit down a little bit from where those seats are, and I look at the stage. I can't see anything. All I can see is the top of the floor and a little bit above the stage. And then I see the steps from the side, because that's where we're off. We're at the side. I said, I can't see anything over here. She says, you need to get in here. This is where we're all seated. And I looked at the big, beautiful section where there's all these other seats, and most of them are empty, but there's people sitting scattered. I don't know any of them. They're all strangers, but they're sitting there in this big open area. And I said, why are we sitting here? Why are we sitting here? It's open. The view is so much bigger. You can see more. And she kept saying, come over here. And I remember I looked at her and I said, why would I want to sit somewhere where I can only see so much, but I can't see much of anything, instead of sitting where I could see so much more? And then I woke up. And it seems clear now, right, from this passage. It seems clear now. But at the time, I kept thinking, why am I dreaming this? Because my immediate sense was I feel guilty because I'm always late everywhere. And so I was almost late there. And Linda's just kind of smiling as I share my dream with her. And I'm like, what? And she says, why would we be in this limited space of vision when we could be in a place of seeing so much more? And I'm like, what? And so she keeps pushing it, and I finally figured it out. And it occurred to me that, of course, that's what's going on. In this story, in this parable, if you will, in this story of Babel, it's this limited vision that we surround ourselves. We construct realities around ourselves that protect us. We align with certain orientations because they feel safe. Some of us are so defensive about, and I'm universal us, some of us get so defensive about our stances that they literally protect our identity. They're like the very foundation we sit upon. And I want to say, yeah, I get it. I understand that's important, but it's such a bigger view. There's so much more. And yet we still struggle over that. In fact, that very struggle has become defined as our identity for many people. And what God's saying, and what I think the story is saying to us, is saying that's not why you're here. It's not God pronouncing a punishment, a judgment. It's God making an adjustment. It's God opening up things and saying, move out there, scatter out there. It's a bigger view, and other people need to see it too. And that's really challenging for us. It's hard to do, for one thing, right? Like, you're going to get together with different families, and some of you are going to have this issue come up like we have. We don't have it so much at our family anymore. I think we've mastered it, and Stan is now a part of our family, and Stan's my brother's partner, and when they come, it was always sort of like this, oh my gosh, is it okay if I use you, Stan? I'm sorry. Some of you people know, I'm not sure if I want to go to church. If he looks at me, I'm an illustration. But we love Stan. Stan has been such a godsend and gift to our family. But it was challenging at first because we have evangelicals and we have NRA card-carrying members, and we have animal rights activists, and we have, I've got a nephew who I love dearly, and he's 6-foot giant plus, and he's in one of these anachronistic societies, right? So he's like in the Middle Ages thing, so he carries Middle Age weapons in his car. Middle Ages, he's like, and he's like, you want to come see him? I'm like, I don't think so. I don't want to give you any opportunity to open the trunk of your car, But he's very adamant about this kind of stuff. And don't talk about it. If you talk about it, it's like I read somewhere, I don't know if it was Jonathan Sachs or someone who said, when we talk from our positions of knowledge, it's like we're talking to a mirror. It's as if we think, I'm going to argue with you, but really I'm just going to be me. I'm just going to pronounce my stance as strong as I can, and boy, do I have it memorized. And you'll hear it. And you'll go, well, now that you told me that, of course I see your point of view, right? That's our problem. We argue as if we're talking to ourselves. And and others argue with us. That's not going to get anywhere. I could argue with my nephew till I'm blue in the face. That's not going to get anywhere. But something's changed with my family, and part of that is because we've stopped talking about certain things. And now we start talking about other things. Compassionate things, children, food-based things. But here's the thing. Those of us who realize what's going on and are committed to this are not trying to avoid the elephant in the living room. And that's a big challenge. When the guys walk into the village and they see nobody's going to feed them, the guy that starts the whole thing isn't sitting there going like, well, we got this major problem, and I got to change these people's attitudes, and they're all wrong. He suddenly just sees the gift of something special and begins to work with it. And sometimes people start seeing it too, and they begin to join in. And it has nothing to do with their fears. It has to do with what's special, with what's wonderful, with what's possible. It's like the wonder in the book that somebody's going to pull off the shelf. They'll open it up, and all of a sudden, they're going to see this thing. Who planted that? Why is that here? Nobody knows anymore. But it doesn't matter. Someone decided to plant a seed of wonder and joy and just see who picks it up. That wonderful parable in Matthew, the kingdom of heaven is like the guy wandering in the field stumbles on a treasure. That's what we try to do. That's what we're invited. Not to get inside a village, not to build walls, not to build a tower, not to sort of surround ourselves, but to scatter out there. It's messy. But as Sharm was saying in her reflection, and as we've discovered, if you've ever done this, sitting with people and truly listening to people's stories, when you're listening for the story and not for, where does this match up with me? Or not for, where can I jump in now with my thoughts on this? But simply to suddenly realize, what can I receive here? So this Thanksgiving, and as we're sort of making our way through the end of this year, and as we make our way into the political realities of next year, and the divisiveness and the struggle that our church is dealing with, as we try to figure out human sexuality and where we are with that, this may be what we can begin to try to do, is to think in terms of how we look past what we see. How do we look past a person for who they always are to us? Don't see me as just a preacher. Don't see me as just a clergy person. See me as something else. What else am I? I don't know. You only get so much of me until you start asking. I only see so much of you until I start asking. Megan Phelps Roper, the daughter of the grandfather who founded Westboro Baptist Church. Y'all remember that church? They're radical protests. They've got a sign on the outside of their deal. It's as if they're saying, pretty much, you're not welcome here, period. It's going to take a lot for you to be invited in our community. So they got the thing that says, GodHatesAmerica.com on their building. Megan Phelps is the granddaughter. She's been a part of this, and so she would go to these protests, and she did a wonderful interview on TED Talk once, and she said, I was doing these protests, and I was arguing our point, where this idea is drilled into us, this way of thinking is drilled into us, and I was arguing this point of view until after a while, I could no longer hear. There's other people right in my face. I have no idea what they're saying. She said, I could care less. I'm here to argue, and the interviewer was like, do you think they're going to change their mind? You think you're going to change their mind? And she stopped. That had never occurred to her. She said, I didn't never really think it was about changing their mind. I just kind of felt like it was about telling them they're wrong. And she said that kind of thinking got her wondering about all those people that are Twittering her, or that she was reading Twitters, because they teach you that if you're going to know your enemy, you got to read their tweets. You got to read what they're saying. And it just was enough to begin to cause her to wonder what they were saying. So she got in these tweets, and it was a tweet war, of course, back and forth, back and forth. But after a while, she stopped arguing because she had this sense that they were asking her more questions. And that was opening up the door for conversation. And so she started doing the same thing, just asking more questions. And she said that through this process of simply being present to each other's Twitters, of listening to each other instead of arguing, she said, through this process, I began to realize something. I actually began to see myself more clearly. And they would admit that they began to see themselves more clearly. It's like the Sonova Clark I told you last week when she talked about how the KKK, Mr. Craig, how he gave up the KKK as a dragon. And when they asked him why, he said, because she just listened to me. He said, she just listened to me. And they asked her, why did you do this? And she says, I didn't try to change his mind. I just listened to him. How powerful a gift it is for us to stand in each other's presence and to listen deeply and to begin to allow each other to say and see who they really are and not as objects or definitions. That's the challenge I think we have always, no matter not just when we gather together, but this ability to look past one another and to see something else that's there. Now, here's what's happened. Here's what happens. When we look past one another, when we look past the definitions we give each other, when we look past our fear, what we begin to see is divinity. What we begin to see is that we are all God's children. Amen.